Good morning. My name is Maria Clayton, and I'm a senior manager at MMP working out of the Cambridge office. MMP is a national accounting, tax, and business consulting firm in Canada. We proudly serve the response of the needs of our clients in the public, private, and non-for-profit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, we provide collaborative, cost-effective approach of doing business and personalizing strategies to help organizations succeed across the country and around the world. This morning, I am pleased to welcome Melissa Durrell. She is a CEO and communication strategist of Durrell Communications. She is known for her distinctive storytelling techniques, honed by her former career as an award-winning Canadian broadcasting journalist. She's now uses her unique skills to set up amplify the change makers through brand storytelling, media training, crisis communication, executive communication, public relations, and media outreach. Grounded in Waterloo, she inspired by the innovative tech sector. Melissa works with an investment pitch coach at several organizations, including the global ranked #1 private business accelerator in Canada, the AC. That passion has worked with the business person's leaders and helped her launch her second company, Roseville Global Incubator, to help the international business persons looking for to build, acquire, scale, and expand their businesses across Canada. Over the past decade, she has helped companies raise over more than $750 million. Paying it forward, with her own experience, Melissa now has advocated for women's voices in politics, business, organizing, and speaking in various conferences. Serving as an elected official in Waterloo for 2 terms, her aggressive leadership style and make it happen attitude focuses on urban issues, community building, environmental sustainability, and solutions. Please help me welcome Melissa.
Hi, thank you very much, Maria. So exciting to be here with everybody today. I'm looking forward to talking to you about storytelling. So let's get moving, shall we? So it just says my screen is loading, and I'm just going to bring everybody up here. Great. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. As Maria mentioned, one of the companies that I own is actually called Roseville Global, and we are in Cambridge, and we are a member of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. It's a business incubator that we work with international entrepreneurs as they come to Canada. So just want to give a shout out to Cambridge businesses and all the hard work that the Chamber does for us. So thank you so much for having me here today. So I've spent a lot of time, and actually I was just on a stage last week, and I was like, I miss being on stages. This is at Communitech. We called it Techtoberfest. And truly, it's one of the places where I really started to understand the power of storytelling. One of the reasons why they brought me into Communitech was we had all of these brilliant engineers and mathematicians that were coming up with awesome business ideas, but they didn't tell a story when they were talking about their companies. They were just basically saying, this is what our product does. And they needed a story to go around in it. And after spending so many years as a journalist, I really realized how powerful storytelling is. And since then, I've watched companies raise millions and millions of dollars and just understand the impact of what a great story is. And I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. Before we get going, though, I wanted to throw out a couple of poll questions. So I think we've got about 10 businesses here right now. Oops, sorry. And so actually, Melissa, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the first poll question. Most businesses have a strategic plan. So I'm just wondering, would you guys give me a little quick answer here? How many of you have a strategic plan? So a plan, and whether you call it a strategy plan, like sometimes we put it in our business plans, but you know the direction you're heading for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah? Okay, good. So great. Okay, so most of you do. That's awesome. Now, let's just take a look here. So yeah, most of you do. So that's amazing. And I guess I can just share the results here, and I hope that's working. So yeah, we're at about 78%. So the majority of you have a strat plan. Awesome. So then my next question is going to be, and I don't know, Melissa, if you can pull it up. If you have a strat plan, how many of you have a strategic communications plan? So that's where you're taking your strat plan and you're saying, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to talk about it. So you've really thought about how you're going to speak about your communications plan. And yeah, this is typically what I start to see here. A lot of people know the direction they're going to go, but they don't understand how they're going to talk about that direction they're going to go. So hopefully, and I'll just end the poll here. So at this point, it looks like the majority of you don't have a strategic communications plan. So that's totally fine. Hopefully today I can give you some ideas and some inspiration on how you can put that all together. So thank you for sharing that with me. Just gonna head back in here. So often I like to start with a story myself. And so, many of you heard that we struggle to get women to run in politics across Waterloo region. And this is a story that I often like to tell people when I'm trying to get female leaders and inspire some equality within our leadership spaces. So it was about 8 years ago. It was after the 2016 election. So we're coming into 2017. And of course, we know that Donald Trump got elected and women around the world marched. We marched in the USA, we marched in Canada, we marched in Europe. It was all over the world. This was the one in DC. It was one of the largest protests we've ever seen in the world. And what led from that is, okay, we can protest, but we actually have to do something about it. And so women all over the United States got together because they realized, look, if we're going to elect men that do not have 50% of the population's interests, they're not holding 50% of the women's interests, we should get more women elected. So women from all over the world. I was one of the women from Canada. We all went to Detroit. We had over 8,000 women from across the USA, and some of us around the world who came and mentored and volunteered at this women's conference. It was at this conference that really one of the most amazing things happened to me that's inspired me for the rest of my life. And essentially what happened there was, this was sort of the big event. It was the last event, and they had senators and congresswomen and all sorts of incredible female leaders on the stage. One of the big sponsors at this event was Planned Parenthood. And so they came up onto the stage and they asked everybody to sit down, and they said, if you are currently elected, please stand up. And so there was really maybe about 12 women in the room, and there were 8,000 women. So when I stood up, I was the only woman in my entire section, no one around me, no one behind me that was standing up. So standing up was very nerve-wracking to begin with. There was a woman behind me and she said, "Oh, you're so young." And I said, "Thank you." So there's maybe 12 of us in a room of 8,000 women. And then the woman from Planned Parenthood had said, "If you're going to run in the next election, please stand up." And it was at that moment, the entire energy in that room changed. And hundreds of women stood up, women in front of me, women beside me, women behind me. And all of a sudden I wasn't alone anymore. And I felt like we can actually make something happen here. All of these women have been training. I was media training women during this whole conference. There was a palpable change of what happened in that time and in that space. And I took that home, and I'd been volunteering for quite a few years on the Women's Campaign School. I had started on it even before I was a politician. And it was at this point that I had taken over as the chair of the Women's Campaign School. In 2010, we had 27 women elected across Waterloo region. And in 2022, as we were running this, our goal was to be more than 50%. And I can proudly tell you that with proper mentorship and a good program, in 2022, 58% of the people elected in Waterloo region were women. And we realized a lot of important things. We have to ask people to run. We have to ask people to mentor, because most people won't just volunteer to do this kind of work. And so why I tell you this story is because it's important to talk about these stories, your personal journey as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and then relaying those facts to how everything happens. And so one of the things is we want to use science. When we tell stories, we actually use science behind it. So there's a little bit of biology. When I'm telling you a story and you're listening to the story that I'm telling, your brain is actually lighting up. So I think there's 15 people in this Chamber of Commerce meeting today. Thank you all for joining. But as I was telling this story, your brain is lighting up because my brain is lighting. What happens is our brains are mirroring each other. It's far more impactful when we're in a room together in person, but Zoom does mimic some of those things because you can see my eyes, you can see the expressions on my face. It's called neurocoupling. So neurocoupling, it has your brain lighting up. And as you listen to stories, you actually gain empathy for me. You might have even felt lonely as I did when I was standing alone in that crowd. And then you may have felt even a little bit of, that's that good oxytocin boost when all of a sudden I felt like I wasn't alone anymore and more women stood up. You're feeling the same feelings I'm having. And that's the importance of storytelling, is that your audience starts to feel the same thing as you. If I just tell a simple story that doesn't really connect with people, you're not going to neurocouple with me. So it's not just about telling a story, it's about telling a story that has empathy in it, that connects, so that your audience neurocouples with your brain. And the very act of telling a story gains trust. And isn't that what we all want to do within our organizations, is tell our stories from our companies and gain trust with our audience so that they remain loyal to who we are. I mean, that's really how we build scalability and growth within our companies. So hopefully that helps a little bit with where we're going, because really story is the most powerful device to connect with people, to convince the human brain. And really that's what we're trying to do. Once we get into people's brains, we don't leave them. It's how people remember names. We put that neural pathway in their brain. And as we all know, misinformation is out there. And in fact, sometimes it's almost too much for us all to manage how much misinformation is out there. So you need, as an organization, to get the right information out there. So, and how you can connect with people and how you can cut through the noise is on any platform, on your website, on your social channels, through the media, you can tell powerful stories. And so I'm hoping that I can inspire you with some storytelling today that'll get you in the storytelling moods if you're not already doing it. And a big part of your strategic communications plan is really telling the stories of the growth of your business or what you have planned for the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. I used to always say 5 years, but since the pandemic, 5 years just seems like way too long. So typically I'm telling people, let's be looking 2 to 3 years out that we can manage. Now, here's my next poll question. And if you want to bring it up, please do, Melissa. Do people make decisions based on emotions or facts? So when we're telling these stories, do we want to be using a lot of emotion, or do we want to be using a lot of facts? So if you want to throw that poll up, that would be awesome, Melissa. The Melissas on the call today.
Hey, Melissa, it's saying it's already launched. Do you have
is it already launched? Okay.
Do you have it up on yours by chance?
Stop sharing. Go back. Poll 3, here we go. Launch. I got it. Launch.
Perfect.
We're in. Okay. So amazing to all the awesome business owners out there. What do you think? Are people making decisions based on emotions, or are they making them based on facts? It looks like I've got a green or 2 person in here. The people that like the science people. I don't know who that one person is, but there you go. Share results. So it looks to us right now like the majority of you, 90% of you, believe in emotions. And then I've got that, is it a mathematician? Is it an engineer on the other end? I don't know, but look, you're all right. People make decisions based on emotions, but then they look for the facts to back them up. So for my one guy, my one person, my one woman in this poll, you are right. And for the people that think about emotions all the time, we do need to have some facts to back it up. So, for the data nerds out there, I'm a bit of a data nerd. I love storytelling, but there's nothing like a great data point to make me salivate. So, go when you're looking at your organization, look for those numbers, those milestones, those kinds of things that you can have, those facts that you can back up. And then if you've got a story to tell with it, or you can workshop a story to make that happen. That's what I recommend. Oops, Daisy, get back into our slideshow. Awesome. Okay, so let's get back into it. So what does storytelling actually look like when we start talking about a strategic communications plan? So really, we've got to have that concept down. What is it that we want to actually be putting out there? And we're going to talk a little bit about that and later. Who are our characters? So, typically we want to make sure that the characters are people in our who are buying our products. We are the Sherpas, our audience are the heroes. We want to make our audience, the people who are going to be buying your products or services, we want to make them the heroes in our story. We're helping them solve problems. We're helping them live better lives. We're helping them solve, get through difficult things with ease, right? So who are these characters that we're helping out? I know so many amazing companies and they're selling their products, but they don't get it's really hard for them to pin down one or two clients that they can actually talk about. So, this is really where you start to see the silos in organizations. I'm not exactly sure who's on this call today, but, any company that's over, 100 people, that sales department becomes a little bit of a silo on its own. So making sure that Marcom's team is working, marketing and communications team, sorry to use jargon, your marketing and communications team is interjecting in with that sales team to hear about the stories that are going on. What are the problems that you're solving for our customers right now? And then they can workshop those stories. One of the biggest inhibitors or things that stops companies from telling great stories is that marketing and communications team isn't connected in with that sales team, because the sales team really is understanding what it is. And the other problem too that I want to mention is, as we're helping these people out, we need to use really clear communications too, as well. So get that jargon out as we're doing larger marketing campaigns. What's the structure of the story? Is it a blog post? Is it a video piece? How are we going to tell this story? Are we going to do it through the media? Are we going to do a news conference and have the media tell our stories, which is third party, which is actually really great because we can tell our own stories, which is really important. And, as I mentioned earlier, with all the misinformation out there, it is really important that every organization has a strong storytelling base. But also, if you look at the media, that third party telling your story, which actually gives more street cred. So, don't be afraid to talk to the media about what you're doing and getting your story out there. And then what's your style? Like, I've got some tech companies that I work with, and they really go for humorous. They go for, like, they want to have a little, they might be a bit more tongue in cheek. Some of my government organizations have to be, very serious about what they're talking about, especially when we're talking about taxes or things like that. So, what is your organization's style? And that's a really important factor, because that's part of your strategic communications plan, is how do we talk to our audience? How do we talk to the people, are not just our customers that we have, but the new customers we're going to be bringing in. So hopefully that helps a little bit with thinking about how you can start to figure out what that looks like for your organization. And then, of course, we have to go back to that really important point, which is be authentic. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and so it's really hard for us to tell stories because we want to keep privacy for some of the people that we're working with. The food bank, family and children's services, there's privacy issues behind it. So, Canadian Mental Health Association. So some of these organizations, it takes quite a while for us to get that story, get the sign off, the consent from the people who we're helping so that they're willing to tell their story, setting up the parameters around it. If it is a mental health story, making sure that the person feels very comfortable telling it. So I think, those are just a few of those factors that could be involved with telling a story, but you got to think about it. And then it's got to feel really authentic. And so, I always say to people, if you don't feel it, the audience isn't going to feel it. So you got to feel it when you're telling that story, and then that will come across. And I always say to people, eyeballs, right? If you can look at somebody in the eyes, it's a difference maker. Reading something on a page doesn't have the same emotion as looking at somebody in the eyes when we're telling some of these short stories. So, using video, I know that this is, we've been talking about video for a very long time, but it does work. It is one of the more trusted sources because you can see people, you can trust them. So that's a really great way to be authentic, because you can actually, the audience will feel it differently when you have someone really telling their story. So typically I work with a lot of engineers and mathematicians, computer scientists. And so many of them have never taken an English class in their life. So I always like to throw up my story arc just to either give a storytelling 101, but for many of you, you might be, you might have taken an English class in university and be more familiar with this. But essentially, we need to make sure that your story has a climax, some sort of midpoint where the tension is rising. So these are just a couple of the elements that we should think about when we're telling stories. You can make it super simple, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But somehow we need to see a character, your hero, go through something, right? So it is an inciting incident, the problem that they are experiencing, and somehow they have to come over that obstacle. Hopefully it's your product or service that's helping them come over that obstacle, or they're looking at competitors at that point. So it brings them up to that midpoint, and then everything changes. The point of this is to show how your company solves their problem and solution. And I always like to say it's the one to many. So you can solve one person's problem, but many people can benefit from it as well. This is a very, like, if you watch the news, I'm going to ruin the news for everybody right now as a broadcast journalist for many years. And I can tell you, like, every story, we start with one person and they have a problem. And then we take it out to the fact that this problem is actually felt by many people. And then we bring in the other side of, here's why this problem is occurring. So we've now got conflict one-to-one. And sometimes it might be 1 to hundreds, but they're still being put up one-to-one. And then we take it to a larger, oftentimes, most journalist stories have to have 3 sources. So we might bring in an expert in to maybe give some expert around it. So you've got sort of the one person, the conflict, where the conflict arises, you bring it up, sort of an expert gives an expert opinion, and then you kind of bring it through to what the resolution may or may be. That's every news story. So sorry, I just ruined the 6 o'clock news for you, but this is what we follow. It's tried and true. And so, use it within your organization. All right, so how are you as an organization going to tell your story? And it looks like many of you are starting to think about how you tell your stories. Some of you have a communication strategy, which is amazing. So looking at that is a really important part. And where we always have to begin is our audience, right? That's the most important factor, because if they're not listening, then why are we even bothering to talk? So put yourself in your audience's shoes. Like, as a trained journalist, I ask a lot of questions. That's just how I am. So when we're asking a lot of questions, which is important for your team to do, we learn and we hear from our clients what they like. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to break through the noise. How do they differentiate your product or service from others? What do they like about working with you? Like, how have you helped them? What are the special things you've done? Having those deep conversations with loyal clients is going to help you start to form those stories. And maybe you've even found your main character, if it's someone compelling that might be able to talk about that. What questions do people ask when you explain your company? That's a really great place to start. When you say, hey, I do this, I'm introducing myself. My name's Melissa Durrell, and I run Durrell Communications. If people say, are you a marketing company? So that is really clear to me that people think that we're marketers, and we're not marketers. We're writers. We're strategic communications writers. So it's a very different place. So part of it for you is to understand when you say your name, what is it that people are hearing? Because oftentimes I think as CEOs, we kind of live in our own our little bubble of our company, right? We're surrounded by many of the amazing team members that we're putting around us. They've got their job descriptions, they're feeding back into us, we're learning about things. It's really important to break through that company bubble, and always remember, we've got to be talking to people outside of that bubble and learning from them. And so a really important part of that is when you're talking to people, not just your customers, but potential customers. So, the Chamber of Commerce does all sorts of great networking events. When you're out introducing yourself and meeting new people, what are the questions that people ask back to you? Start to write those down. I've got a notes app in my phone that I throw all sorts of questions in, things that I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought people would consider my company be able to do this. And so it's kind of interesting to hear the kind of feedback you get, because you know, a lot of times people are inundated with a lot of different information. And, you know, I think I can't even remember what it was. It's something like 50,000 ideas are flowing through our brains at any given time. And so if I'm talking, I'm going to pull some information out of it. And everybody else on this call could pull different things. I'm giving the same speech to 17 people right now. At the end of this speech, almost all of you will have a different thing that you're pulling out of it. So if you think about the impact of that, every time you put a blog out or an ad or tell a story, give a speech, the people in that audience are all going to take away different pieces of that. So with your strategic communications plan, you've got to get really clear on what those key messages are. And I typically say to companies, within a year to 2 years, having 3 key messages. So all of your communications come down to 3 messages, and that you can manage. If you're putting out all sorts of information on all different channels, it's really, really hard for you to be able to manage all of those questions, concerns, and all that information, and the way that it's going to be misinterpreted or filed in different places. So being really clear and concise about what your audience needs to know about your company to make decisions to work with your company should really come down to 3 compelling key messages. And so getting to know who your audience is, finding out what people already know about your company and think about your company, and then preparing those 3 key messages. And that's all your marketing, communications, your CEO speeches, everything really comes down to those 3 key points. And those 3 key points are all connected through great storytelling. Yeah? Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm used to being in a live audience, so sorry if I'm like going at you. One of the things that people always say to me is, where do we start? And I have to give credit where credit is due. I worked for a news director in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and I was I was a rookie reporter. It was really my first on-air job. I was working in Saskatoon, and I had a great news director there that took on a little rookie who just wanted to tell great stories. And I would pitch stories constantly, because as the lowest one on the totem pole in the newsroom, I pretty much was getting the stories no one else wanted to do. And I realized pretty quickly that if I could pitch better stories, then they would allow me to do those stories rather than the ones that fell to the bottom. So I was always pitching stories constantly, you know, talking to people on the street. What do you care about? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the news director in Saskatoon, every single time I come into his office to pitch a news story idea, he would say to me, why should I care? And it's a really great question to ask yourself and your marketing and communications teams as you're coming up with your key messages and the stories that will promote those key messages. Why should people care? And it's a hard one. I actually put it on, I've got on sticky notes on my laptop, because it's something I come back to quite often. And it's one of the key questions I often ask when I'm working with a new CEO, and they're telling me, you know, how earth shattering or mind blowing this new product is. And I always say, why should people care about it? And you can really get, you know, there's a Simon Sinek, he keeps asking the question, why, it brings you down. I really like to center it around people. Why should people care? Because if we can get there quickly, we can get to that empathy and the emotion. And then we go for the facts to back it up. So really figure out, why should people care? Ask yourself that question. It's really important. Why should people care about your product? Why should people care about your company? Why should I care about you as the leader or the person talking about it? Make me care about what you're actually doing. So hopefully at that point, it gets you to a really interesting concept. So this is going to break you out of sort of the day-to-day kind of things that you're thinking about. You know, that your marketing team is going to be on a micro basis, right? They've got 6 posts they got to do in a week. So they're going to be pretty micro on how that looks. So you've got to remember, with your StratCom, we got to stay high level. We're not even thinking about that micro until we get to the next phase. So we get to that concept level. What could those big key messages be? And one of the things that I often say to people when we're starting to think about our storytelling ideas, they need to be compelling. So one of the ideas around this is using empathy. Why should people care? And then it has to be interesting, right? Like you can't just tell a story. So, one of the things that I often do, especially with that female empowerment story that I told you off the top, was I like to tag it to Trump. And I like to tag it to the largest protest that the globe, our earth, has ever seen, because it gives it the weight, right? So this is a global problem, but we're solving it on a local level. And think about it, if every single municipality across Canada focused on diversity and equality in their governments, and everybody went to try to get to that 50% mark across our country, then the whole country benefits. So it's sort of like, that's sort of that small, how can we all do one thing, but it can help on a global basis. So think about that for you. Like, what are those? How can you relate it to a bigger issue? Is it climate change? Is it financial security? Is it those bigger issues that people are talking about? And how can you relate that back to your story and your story of your organization, attaching it to sort of that global push for a perfect world? Is it interesting? What will people want to hear? What will they want to know more about? So, as we're all starting to become these great storytellers, when you're talking to somebody and they kind of lean in a little bit, they're curious to see the story you're setting up. That means you got a good story. So try things out, like at the next Chamber of Commerce networking night, lunch, breakfast event. Try to tell a story or two and see what the stories are that really keep people's eyes on you, and the stories where they start to do the oh, I'm gonna get some more coffee, right? Like that story doesn't work. If people are walking out of your circle, you need a new story. So what are those stories? So try things out. I often had a venture capitalist that I love to work with. They're fantastic, and one of the things they said is like a great story is often you're like it keeps you compelled right till the very end. So there's like tons of different ways. One of the things I recommend is I have a storyteller tactics. This is called PIP decks. Ditch dull presentations, tell great stories. This is a really great resource. You literally can go into it. If your team is having trouble with a story, you can just pull one out and it'll say innovation curve. And it talks about how you can write an innovation story for your company. So really, there's a lot of great things out there. You can hire do a storytelling workshop within your organization to get that going. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but you want to make sure you're telling interesting stories, grabbing people's attention. It should hook your audience. So like a great headline, for the journalist in me, your company's one-liner should grab people's attention. And the other thing, which of course I'm getting to because it's on the screen, we always want people to say, I want to know more. It's really important that your story can also lead to them Googling you or going to your LinkedIn page or going to your website, something where they can learn a little bit more about you. Then we know that that story is definitely working. Your comm strategy is definitely working. And so we can do this by doing rational and non-rational. Here's some examples of what I mean by rational and non-rational. Rational is where we're really quantifying. So what's the pain that your customers are feeling? And that allows us to quantify the opportunity of working with you and your organization. Making the product is very rational. That's what it is, right? What's unique can be very rational. It's the facts, right? Successes so far, you've got data, you've got milestones. These are things that you can point to. What's in it for your customer? So how are you going to help them be more successful, live a better life, whatever your product service is promising? What's in it? Make sure we're being very clear and concise about how we're talking about these rational items. Your skills of your team, your experience. I, as an angel investor, one of the things that I've often noticed is it's not always the best ideas that are getting funding. Sometimes it's the best teams, the best leadership teams, because a good leadership team can pretty much get anything to happen. Sometimes great ideas don't happen because you don't have a good team. So I definitely think that's one of the things. If you've got that awesome team, let's tell part of that story, the story of your team coming together, how they solve big problems together, all those kinds of things. Now, the non-rational stuff that we're talking about is that like we really want to make the pain human. So we want people to feel when we talk about the pain that people are having, we have to make that pain human. So what is it that your product or service helps people with? And somehow through that emotional story, we need to, that pain has to come through. The character of your team, right? So if we're using the character, like you can say they're an experienced team. You can say that they're an experienced team, that they're a compassionate team, but these are non-rational, right? So you need to tell, we have to show, not tell a lot of these non-rational things. Why you? That's a non-rational decision people are making too, and your personal enthusiasm. So these are things you can bring to the table. And all of these things can actually be that sales tool that makes something go from a maybe to a yes. So don't, as we focus so much on rational, I imagine most of your sales strategies focus on the rational, but bringing in that now non-rational part of it is really important, because that's at the end of the day how we start to make those sales happen. And so I always want to just remind everybody that simple communication is great communication. I work with a lot of organizations that have a ton of jargon associated with them. I often tell the story, when I first got elected to city council in Waterloo in 2010, I went into my first in-camera meeting. And for those of you who aren't politicians, an in-camera meeting is actually no cameras. It's a meeting where you can basically speak freely, but you're learning information that it won't be going public. So my first in-camera meeting, we were discussing that some of the new councillors had to get brought up to speed on a pretty controversial issue. And within the first 2 minutes, the person who was speaking used so much jargon that I had I actually put up my hand. I was like, I don't know what, half those acronyms are. So you got to go back and start to tell me. So I think we get used to them, and all those city workers have been around a council for the last 4 years. That council knew all the acronyms. They could talk like that. But most people don't speak in acronyms except when you're in your business bubble, right? You've got your own language. So making sure that you have somebody going through all of that to make sure that when we put it out into the universe, that we're getting rid of that jargon. Simple communication is great communication. And those who communicate clearly always win. So just knowing that that's something that we really need to do. And I want to share a story with you. At the very beginning, you saw me on a stage for Techtoberfest. Well, this was the winner of that Techtoberfest that year. And it was a guy named Herman Lowe. And Herman Lowe was spent much of his time looking in a microscope. And when he did actually look up from his microscope, one of the things that he noticed is that hospitals were spending a ton of money on sending these glass-plated blood samples. So they plate them, and then they would send them to somebody who could actually read them. There's Herman right there on the screen. And so he was thinking, hey, it costs money to send these plated blood samples, and it takes time, right? Like, it can't be read immediately. So we started to look at technology that could read that plated blood sample right away. And he did it. And this is about a couple years ago. So, I mean, now it doesn't sound so unbelievable, but what he was missing was baby Sarah. So his Views IQ technology was being tested in Burnaby, BC, about 300 kilometers from Vancouver. And this baby Sarah was rushed into hospital in Burnaby, BC. Her blood was taken, it was plated. And Views IQ technology had an expert in Vancouver that read the blood sample that moment. And baby Sarah is alive today because of Views IQ technology. Well, that was the story. And everyone was talking about baby Sarah at this tech conference where all of them were looking for $1 million+ to help them grow their companies. But it was baby Sarah that stole the show. And it's because he went from saving time and saving money to life-saving technology, and this story stuck. So one of the things I want you to encourage you to do is turn your office space into a place where you have a storytelling culture. What are those stories? What are the unique things that you can do? Now, not all of us are going to be saving lives. If you are incredible, tell that story. but some of us are telling stories on a bit more of a micro scale, something that might not be as impactful, but it's okay. Let's tell those stories because your story is going to help someone. You wouldn't have a company if what you were doing wasn't going to help. Now, I know we're talking B2B and B2C. So if you are a business to consumer, that's a very easy way to tell that story. If you're business to business, you sell business to business, that story really has to we have to know who the audience is that we're selling it to. Is it the CTO? Is it the CEO? Is it who on that team do we have to talk to and tell them our story? And then once we have a really clear idea of who they are, which most of you probably done some work around personas, then what's the story that's going to impact them and make them want to make a decision about how they're going to change? So I encourage all of you to sort of start to build these sort of blue sky kind of mentality. So who's the hero in your story? Is it a person who's transformed as the story progresses? Are we turning the ordinary into extraordinary? Is it your consumer? How can your product make your consumer a hero? And I really want you to sort of think about that. That's one of the questions. What's your goal? Is your business solving a problem? Is it a customer transformation? Where is your customer today and where do they want to go? So all of these questions can help, because so many times people say to me, like, we get it, but we don't know where to start with a story. So as a journalist, I start with questions. So these are a ton of questions that you can put out there to start to get your storytelling chops starting to be on high alert. Let's think about your customer, where they're today, where they want to go. What will she physically look like when the transformation has taken place? Will she be healthier? Will she be happier? Will she have a more balanced life? What are this? So what will she physically look like? And then what will she be able to do that she can't do now? So as your customer, will she be able to do something different than she was able to? Will she have more time so she can spend more time with her family, or grow the business? What is it that you're allowing that customer to do? Because we're really going from today to where they want to go. So when we think about that, this is the gap story we're telling right now. What will she have as your customer? What will she believe? Is our customer, is our product or service actually going to change beliefs? And if that's the case, ooh, what a great story to tell. I'm in. What new connections or relationships will they have? So that's a different question too. If they're here today and they want to go here tomorrow, so what will that look like for them? What new relationships will they have? And at the end of the day, the big question, who will she be after she's done that transition? That customer hero goal is really a key story. And I encourage every client to have that customer story in their back pocket that they can tell, that really shows that transformation that your product or service can deliver on. I also just throw out some more questions here. I just want to basically blast you so you can get your brains going. What's your obstacle? If transformation was easy, they don't need your product or your service, right? So there has to be an obstacle that we're trying to get them through. Where's that gap, the gap between your hero today and where they want to go? What's keeping your hero from attaining that goal? What's standing in their way? Are they emotional? There's psychological roadblocks. What's the inner obstacles they must overcome and to get to that prize? What's the moral of your story? It should be really simple, clear, and direct. And finally, is it true? So that's one of the things when I talk about being authentic, we need it to be true. There needs to be that truth. Now, I want you to use real clients. For people who can't use a client due to privacy or those kinds of things, can we use a real client story and then change the name? And I know with some victims, not victims, but survivors, there's some issues with that because, you never know if you're using a story, how much of that element you have to change to protect their identity. So, there's some experts out there. My team at Drill Communications can help with that as well. But, if you're going to be using a story and there's a bit of a sticky situation, I recommend bringing a consultant in or a communications person you trust. but be authentic. You know, a testimonial is just a testimonial. And I think so many, I mean, I'm sure I was actually one of the poll questions I was going to have is how many people have testimonials? Those are great, but a testimonial isn't a story. Testimonial is one character saying nice things about your company. They're a great place to go to start your storytelling. And we go to a bank to get money. Every organization I know should have a story bank to go get stories. So starting to write a story bank in your organization, and you can start with your testimonials and turn those into greater stories. The fact that somebody has actually put their name behind something that is going to help your organization means that they're probably going to be pretty open to allow, like, to having you then, you know, you take their story to that next level, but be authentic about it. You know, the other thing too is this isn't going to happen overnight. So it can be a bit of a longer process. It usually starts with talking about your company or your product, a brainstorming session. You know, what's the problem you're solving? You want to make it very people orientated. Go to your why. So for all of you with the Simon Sinek, you know, your why as an organization, what gets you to work every day and keeps you coming back through thick and thin. We all went through the thick and the pandemic. So I think this is an easier question for many of us to answer now. What's our why? Work from there. But great stories inform, they entertain, and they engage. And those are the checks you got to make at the end of it. Okay. And then you got to get a hook. So, you know, every news story has a hook. If you're pitching to the media, your story has to have a hook. The stories that you, and when I say hook, really, like, the hook is exactly what it means. It's a hook into people's brains. That's what we want to do. We want to literally hook them in. And oftentimes, you know, every organization has a hook pretty much related to their name. So, you know, at Durrell Communications, we amplify change makers. That's our one-liner that we use. Almost every organization has your company name and typically a one-liner underneath it. That one-liner should be a hook. Like amplifying change makers. So that tells you a little bit about what we do as an organization. But back to my old point, do you want to know more? Who are these change makers? What are they doing? So then it allows me time to start to tell the stories about the incredible people that we get to work with every single day that make Waterloo Region, Ontario, Canada, and the world a better place to live. So that allows me then to inject into my story. So your one-liner should be able to connect you into that greater strategic communications plan. And then truly, you got to create this storytelling culture in your organization. And it starts at the top. So I don't know if I've got a lot of CEOs in my call right now, presidents of organizations. It's got to start with you. And so a really great way to do that, I'm going to break that down in about 2 seconds here, but you know, you need to start telling stories, positive stories about your employees. If you're doing internal communications, positive stories about the team that's making it happen. Externally, we need to tell positive stories about the customers that you're helping. So you need to be able, as a CEO or leader of your organization, to be telling those stories on a regular basis. And then it'll start to filter down. Your marketing and communications team, your sales team, if you've got a tech team, your HR team, all of your leads, managers, directors in your organization, everyone needs to be part of this storytelling culture. I have some organizations now that actually, like, that's part of what they do in their town halls, is people are getting up and instead of giving a report, which everybody can read, a spreadsheet or some pie charts, now instead of doing that, they're telling stories to start to promote this storytelling culture. And the data is then given at either at the end, or it's given as you know, just something that you should read before you come into the meeting. But what it's doing is, hey, who would rather go to a town hall with stories rather than pie charts and data? So it's changing town halls even within, you know, the first 2 to 3 town halls, the whole culture's changing. I had an organization that came to me, they wanted to get everybody telling better stories. And so they started to train, you know, their employees to be better storytellers because they were creating the storytelling culture. And if they were going to get on stage at a town hall to tell a story, they wanted it to be great. So once you start, it really ends up, and someone's got great storytelling techniques. And, you know, if I hear a story from the sales team that I can use in my storytelling when I'm, you know, onboarding new employees, helps the whole organization. So what does it actually look like? Because people are like, so what is that? So what does storytelling culture look like to me? Well, you've got this campaign idea. So whatever that great story is, right? We've got 3 key messages. Really what we're looking at is one of those key messages. It becomes your campaign idea. It's a great, compelling story. So we can do it. We tell this story, we break it down. So it can be a blog. It should also have some video elements to it, well, because as I said, we really want to get that eyeballs, right? We want to see somebody's eyeballs. We want to get that visual effect. When we're painting a picture for people, we don't want it just to be a black and white picture. And when we tell it through video, we give them the color, we give them the visual for them to actually have, rather than if they're reading a blog, they are coming up with their own visuals. So what can we do there? And, you know, depending on your budget, perhaps maybe is just a blog, and then the pictures you're using become really important as well. But I highly recommend, you know, you can do video cheap and cheerful these days. Get your story into a video. And then of course, so what do we, now we need to tell people about it, right? So we can post it to our website. Then we can take little clips from it on social media that can lead back to that greater story. On LinkedIn for your company, the company should be sharing that video, that story, and your leadership should then be sharing the company's LinkedIn story to their personal LinkedIn pages. So now we're spreading this story out. The CEO or your president, the leader of your organization, should be using this story when they're doing internal communication, so town halls, starting meetings, anything along those lines, but also externally when they're speaking on panels, you know, speaking on, you know, radio shows, whatever, however externally your CEO is using their platforms, that's how they need to be telling that story. Putting an opinion editorial together, telling your story through an opinion editorial in the newspaper. So it's your words, but it's being printed in a newspaper. This allows you to get new people looking, eyeballs on your company and what you're doing. Also sending a news release out to the media about this. So this is a great place to make sure that there is a news hook to it. So why should the media care? Why should so-and-so on the street care? That's where you've got a really strong story that you want to tell. So you've got a news release that you can put out to the media, and then get your team to be sharing it on their own social, sharing it at the water cooler, those kinds of ideas. So that's one way to take one great story and then have it be, and I mean, this would take 2 to 3 months to implement throughout your organization. But you better believe after 3 months, everyone knows this story and they're all singing from the same songbook, the same Stratcon. Okay. All right. And then after I got you all inspired to start telling stories, I'm going to finish with, just because you found a great story doesn't mean it's the perfect fit. So, you know, I talked to you before about trying some of these stories out on people to make sure that you can be tweaking your stories. I'm always, you know, trying to tweak stories to make it a little bit better, a little bit stronger. You know, can we put a pun in it? I don't know, but always start to think, and if a story's not working, it's time to move on to another story. Essentially, I hope that this has helped you kind of get a little bit more on your storytelling culture. And I always say your story should end with a nice red bow on the top. So hopefully this has inspired you. Melissa, I don't know, is it possible to ask questions, or what is the rest of this process?
Yeah, if anyone does have any questions, you can put it in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay, I'll open up that chat. Thanks everybody for coming today, though. It's really fun to be able to chat.
Thank you very much. It was great.
And if you have any feedback, anything that resonated with you, this is when everybody leaves, right? All the participants leave to start the chat. And can they come on, Melissa, onto camera if they want to share a story?
can't be visible, but I can allow them to talk.
Okay. If you have a
If
short story you
anyone-
want to share, I'm happy to listen to it and give you some feedback on it and help tweak it. That's truly where my zone of genius is. So if anybody feels bold enough to want to share a story, please do. Okay.
So far, nothing.
Here. All
No.
right. And it looks like people are coming up. So I would say then, thank you everyone for coming out today. Please follow Drill Communications on LinkedIn. If you want to give a fellow Cambridge company, one of my favorite Cambridge companies, a like, we're Roseview Global Inc. And that's on LinkedIn as well. So love to promote you as well. Let me know. Thanks, Maria.
It's great. Thank you so much. That was great, Melissa.
Thanks, everyone.